everyone. So this session is the fourth session of the day, focusing on Foresight City Region 3.0. The aims of the session are to explore three overarching questions and to plan a program of co-production. So you can understand from the name that it will be an interactive session. So we'll be discussing questions like, what would a Foresight City Region 3.0 look like in 2050, in different places, different cities, different spaces? So cities are, again, important places where most of the, as we discussed, socioeconomic life take place. So it's important to look at their future and then understand, because city futures are pretty much corresponds with humanity futures. So what can we learn from the pandemic as it goes by, and which pathways can lead to this goal based on collective foresight intelligence? So we will try to see a demonstration of this collective foresight intelligence by putting our heads together through these online platforms. And so we have very distinguished participants in this session, starting with Joe Ravitz from the University of Manchester, UK. Very short introductions, and we have Geçi Karuri-Sebina. I hope Geçi is with us already. So she is from South Africa with School of Governance, and we have Wendy here, Wendy Schultz, Infinite Futures, SAMI, the UK, Fabiana Scapolo, European Commission, Directorate General Joint Research Center. She's also joining us. And then we have Ian Miles here, and from Higher School of Economics and the University of Manchester. So without further delay, I just handed over to Joe to explain our approach and methodology for this process for today's session, which will consist of some presentations, a set of presentations from our distinguished speakers, and then a session on co-production, which is an interactive session on pilot projects. Joe.
Great. Thanks, Ozcan. Thanks, everybody, for coming. And thanks particularly to speakers for, stepping up and sending things and so on. Very much appreciated. First thing is, it's really helpful to us if everyone can put their name into the chat and maybe a couple of words about, their interest or something. And then we can look at this later, and then hopefully, as we follow through, contact you, if you don't mind, and follow through. So if I may share my screen, hopefully this is working. And I'd like to introduce, firstly, the general idea of this Foresight 3.0. I think Ozcan has already said a few words in the previous session, so thanks for doing that. And then how the session runs and why we're here, and how does it apply to the particular case of cities and regions. Very practical. We all live in them. So let's place the Foresight 3.0 grand idea into something very practical. My screen is working okay, Ozcan?
It is working, yes.
Okay, great. So, well, a quick recap, because I started this journey about 12 months ago, and I was drawing pictures of the corona problem, and then 12 months later, what have we learned? Well, we can start to draw some conclusions. And one is, if we just use linear thinking, first we open up the economy, great, but then the health cases grow, and oh my God, we have to shut down the economy, and then the health cases might come down, and so on. In other words, this is really not a very intelligent way to live with this virus, whether it's here short term or medium term or long term, nobody really knows. One reaction is to believe no one and everything. And here you see, the rabbit hole effect, the no vaxxers and no 5G and so on and so on. Another equally opposite reaction is to say, we had better divide the city and the society into zones of safety and risk, high and value, high value, low value. and so on. And here you see, a picture of the city. This is more or less a map of Manchester at the moment. I could elaborate on another time. So is there a way forward which really uses the best of human knowledge and human imagination, running foresight, large, small, local, international, and so on, to find a way to live with this virus thing? Now, the virus is only one of a long list of challenges, as we know. So given the fact that cities and regions are on the front line, how can they best respond and think more strategically than they do already? How can they use the imagination of their citizens? How can they unlock the incredible potential of entrepreneurs and all the enterprises, and so on and so on? So that is the broad context. And then as a contribution, we started to evolve this 3.0 kind of idea and the notion of collective strategic intelligence, meaning, oh, okay, we know it when it's not there, when things are really stupid and everybody is unjoined up and government departments cannot even understand each other, let alone talk to each other. And the private sector is completely disconnected from any social responsibility, and so on and so on. So all of this adds up to a foresight model. And well, we're trying it here and there. We have sessions on AI, we've had sessions on social innovation and empowerment. And this is one particular session where we thought, okay, it's time now to come back to the city and regional question. And if we say, what are the applications of this collective anticipatory intelligence? Well, one is inside the foresight process, meaning, yeah, if we get our act together as practitioners, best data, best methods, best applications, best imagination, and so on. But the other part of it is outside the process, where how many of us as practitioners have done a great exercise and then, the policymaker says thanks and puts it on the shelf. Or even worse, halfway through, they change the goalpost and you have to struggle to get your fee and so on. This has happened to me more than once. So again, then the foresight process has to look around at the client, the society around it, and say, okay, can we help that society to grow its collective anticipatory intelligence? So that's the broad context. Then, well, as I mentioned, we have these experimental 1, 2, 3D spaces. If you follow the links, it's in the on the briefing paper website and so on. I'll put it back in the chat in a moment. And you'll see already the slides are on this mural whiteboard at the top. And also there's the beginning of an exploration, in other words, a lab test of a model for a Foresight City 3.0 in the center of this map. And also, where there are slides, we encourage people to comment, ask questions, critique, spin off, put in examples, links, other things. And if you really don't like a slide, well, yeah, say so. We would like to know. So again, we're trying to expand the normal kind of channel of communication out from the how do we say, traditional show and tell, expert stands up, shows 20 minutes of PowerPoints, and then there's a couple of questions, and then the next expert stands up. We think there is much more that can be done. And especially if we're doing foresight processes, we need the best imagination that we can get. And this is why also we introduce the 3D space. This is an experimental zone. Constructed actually for another project, but you can see from the site map, there is a SmartWise corner that's focused on the technology. There's an EcoWise corner focused on sustainability, and a ForWise corner. This is focused on the foresight. So these represent three main branches. Oh, there's also a main screen where we show movies and things. These represent the three main streams of our emerging laboratory for collective intelligence. And I say emerging, the plan is evolving, kind of week by week, but it's looking very interesting so far, and I invite you to join. not only this event, but the follow-up to this one and maybe other events too. So then, well, sorry, writing's a bit small. We introduced a scenario. Well, let's say Ian Miles, who is here, he's a great, scenario thinker and, futures aficionado, I think. So he said, well, I think we should have a scenario. Fine. So the scenario in this case, it's described in more detail in the briefing paper, which is on the event website. Again, I'll put the link in the chat in case anyone needs it. But the scenario name is called Mosaic, Massive Multi-Agent Online Scenario Appraisal Colloquies. I'd have to think about that. But it's basically, we get AI and big data to do the job for us. Of foresight, of trend analysis, horizon scanning, VR modeling of digital twins, and you can interact with your future self or your past self, because it's all online, of course, and so on and so on. So the short question is, how can this amazing thing really work? And then the more interesting question is, what could possibly go wrong, or at least be unforeseen? Because, of course, you can look at the list on the right-hand side of, oh, wow, we could do this, we could do that, fantastic, wow. But we know from examples already, yes, well, we have put urban planning, for example, online, you can look up documents, that's much more efficient than ever before. But do we really have a better planning system? Not really, not in the UK, arguably. So what are we missing? And as you can see from the little cartoon, the future is here now, it's all mixed up, and is deeply problematic when we have robots, that then tell the humans what they can or can't do. So that's in the kind of background of the scenario thinking. We have a case study, and I'll just say Mark Tudor Jones was one of the leaders of this case study. I believe I did the report on environment, sustainability, and this diagram was put into the final report, and they identified two current challenges in long-term thinking about UK city futures. Okay, there's the scenario, typical, textbook trumpet, probable, plausible, possible, and so on. Well, one challenge is the trumpet gets more and more interesting after 25 years or more. But one challenge is, well, beyond 25 years, city planners really don't want to go there. It's just too fuzzy. Even though they are putting in infrastructure like roads, railways, airports, which will be there for a long time more than 25 years. But it's kind of too difficult. It's too risky. Hostage to fortune, as the chief planner of the Department of Environment once told me. And then the other challenge, even more great, is to say, oh, challenge two, non-probable, non-business as usual, infrequently considered in city futures. So, for example, the pandemic, well, it was on all the, foresights and risk assessments and so on. Did the city planners take this into account? Nope, not in the UK. So there we have it, not to blame city planners, they're all, kind of doing the best they can. But, the way that the institution is configured, it doesn't quite work. So again, the big practical question is, what can we contribute, back to those people out there on the front line, so to say? And well, just put this table in also from the final report of this project. Benefits of city foresight: local strengths, resilience, strategy refinement, investor confidence, strategic partnerships, tackling challenges, civic engagement. What is not to like, as they say? But then what could possibly go wrong? Why does this not work? Even when people try it, there are deep problems. Now, also, in reality, there are many different versions, 1,000 different flowers based on similar ideas are blooming all over the place. So it's not to say that foresight, is, the truth and everybody else is wasting their time. Rather, I think to say that foresight has a really powerful set of insights. and a really big contribution to make, particularly in the age that we live, where turbulent, even chaotic, and so on. So this is, again, the reason for wanting to explore. Well, some people say, well, what is this 3.0 thing? Well, here is a kind of very brief summary. Foresight 1, the problems are basically quite short-term, quite functional, and we try to fix them. So if we need 5,000 houses, great, where do we put 5,000 houses? Mode 2 is more like a kind of, well, you could say it is evolutionary, neoliberal maybe, competition, innovation, incentives. So if we have 5,000 houses, how do we improve the value of those 5,000 houses? It's a market question, incentive and psychology question. And that's fine, but we could say, well, actually the humans in here, they're not only like little, machines that need houses, they are humans. They look for livable communities. And these livable communities cannot be just built by a developer, they have to emerge. But the developers and planners and architects maybe can help. So if we conceive of the building of 5,000 houses, not just as a material operation, but as a kind of emergence, a collaboration, even a so-called collective urban intelligence, where all of the stakeholders involved need to learn from each other. So that's the kind of short answer. How this applies to Foresight City, we're struggling for the right word here actually, co-futures. Well, we look for enhanced scanning, enhanced systems analysis. We work with people, practitioners out there, as I'm doing myself at the moment, and say, okay, maybe we could draw a map of your little problem here. How would that work? Does that help? And so there's a responsive kind of mode of inquiry, appreciative inquiry, and elaboration of possibilities, and so on. If I came in and said, oh, let's just run a foresight exercise and everybody must join in, well, I would be wasting my time and theirs. So again, we look for ways forward which are not necessarily in the textbooks, not necessarily easily defined, but we know what we are trying to do. So, well, then there's a couple of pictures. These are on the whiteboard, by the way, so I do encourage to, if I jump through these very quickly, you can have a look on the whiteboard while you're doing things and answering emails and so on. But this just tries to visualize the difference between the one on 2.0 and the 3.0. And on the 3.0 side, yeah, our problem definition is much wider. We do not assume that we know everything about what is going on or even how to define the problem. We assume that we are looking at transformations rather than simply growing, simply adding 5,000 houses into this city, for example. And to do this, creative thinking is the way forward. Here's some examples. And more examples are now, digital. This is the reason for doing this thing today. We also have to talk about government. Well,
I guess we lost the connection with Joe. Or probably I'm disconnected. Joe, do you hear me? We don't hear you. Okay, as far as I understand, we lost Joe because I see everybody else moving in the screen and Joe is frozen. So that means he's actually disconnected. Hi, Joe. Do you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. So anyway, I was about to come back to you because we are probably slightly running out of time. So just to give an opportunity to our speakers, maybe we can just wrap up and move on.
Yes, but please continue. I will catch up.
We hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes, I see you. Yeah, we see that you are typing.
Well, I'll skip the rest of the systems analysis because you can, as many of you have seen it before in some way, and I think you can catch up on the whiteboard, etc. But just to, if I just scroll to the end of this particular thing, there are examples from the urban planning scene, from local economic development, there's a systems summary which looks like that, and then more exploration of how to find the elephant in the room, and so on and so on. And finally, to say this is one of a series. Through this series, we are trying to build up. This is not just a one-off event and then we'll go away and that's it. We're trying to build up a body of knowledge and practice. And over the course of this year, we want to identify a number of case studies with a number of important themes, and hopefully people can say, yeah, that's something I'm working on. Maybe I could contribute. So we'll gather together different people around different themes and aim towards a output. And it's just a complete coincidence that Professor Ozcan here is the editor of a journal. Wow, I never would have thought. So we thought, okay, maybe we could aim our outputs towards a special issue in that journal and surround it with other non-academic things or more informal things, which can take place on a variety of channels. So I do hope that many of you here can be part of that process, which I'm sure will add huge value to everything that you are doing. And I'll come back to that in the part 2 after, what would it be, 4 o'clock your time. There's the interactive session, part 2, which a bit more can be explained. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe, for the introduction. So the interactive session will begin in about an hour and 5 minutes. So which will be about 5 p.m. Our time and 3 p.m. your time probably. So now I guess we can move on based on this background that Joe's provided to us. So I'd like to invite now Geci to talk about Foresight for Cities and Regions. And more, of course. Geci, the screen is yours. Great to see you.
Good to see you too. Yeah. Thank you so much. And I am going to attempt to share my screen here. Let's see. Super, it's working. So good afternoon, good evening. I'm not sure where everybody is. I believe I'm just an hour apart from those who are in Moscow. Sorry, I don't know why they started at the end. Really excited to follow up from where Joe left off, because the ideas of Foresight 3.0 in my own work have been really exciting to the extent that, and one of the questions we were asked is, what can we learn from COVID? In my context in Africa and a lot of my work on the future of cities in Africa, I think if there's anything positive that could be claimed to have come from COVID, it's really been the opening up of the question, the willingness to appreciate and accept that perhaps we weren't entirely sure what we were doing, and perhaps the solutions are not all there, and perhaps the questions are much more open-ended. Perhaps we are not even asking the right questions, and I think Joe has alluded to all of this. So I thought what I would share today are just some of those thoughts in terms of how we, in this talk of decolonizing, which scares some people because they think we're talking about literally colonization. I think you'll see we're talking more about decolonizing the future than the question of who colonized the past. And I like to use this image that we came up with in one of our workshops, where we said, well, if you think about colonizing the future, it's really got to do with imagination and what we think the limits of possibility are. And often we find, when people ask me to come and speak about the future of African cities, often what I'll find is that there's a very particular idea that people already hold about what is possible in the future. And often it's painting a vision, and I think Joe has spoken very well to this, that really isn't that different from where we're coming from, and probably even accentuates some of the problems as we go from the small bowl to the big box. So what have we been talking about in this regard? And sorry, I see this little images here. And there's a website there for those who are interested. We've been talking about when we use foresight and when we begin to engage with people about the future, and particularly when we do it as experts, those who know how to think about the future, the combination of that, as well as the set of tools perhaps that we insist are the tools for engaging with the future, as well as a sense that we in fact can see the future and begin to suggest pathways, some of which are compulsory. It seems to be the only choices we can make because they're the only ones within the realm of plausibility, or they appear to be the most optimal ones, meaning that we have a sense of what's the best thing to be done in this case, begins to impose 3 levels of what we call coloniality into the future. The idea that we colonize intellectually and institutionally by insisting that only some people have the power to future or to do foresight. The idea that procedurally, in terms of how we do anticipation, that there are only a finite acceptable set of ways for doing that, as opposed to appreciating a wider context of anticipatory cultures that I believe almost every culture in the world has. So there's an issue there, and there's a wonderful word, epistemicide, this idea of killing other ways of knowing, other ways of developing knowledge. But then also the political and societal coloniality that then comes with creating a very finite set of what the future can be. And that's taken us essentially into this much more messy diagram that I won't go into here, but you can read about on that website, where we say that those 3 kinds of colonization when it comes to the future really begin to create all sorts of limitations, but can be countered purposefully through a number of procedures that we are suggesting, such as the idea of co-design, where you challenge those worldviews by involving people, integrating people in process. The idea of action research, which is more about questioning and learning by doing rather than learning with answers in the pocket. This idea of transdisciplinarity and ultimately collective intelligence. And if you are listening carefully to Joe, this might sound very familiar, because I believe this is what Foresight 3.0 in fact invites and begins to speak on. So I think just perhaps to say there's a wonderful synergy between how we see foresight for the future, and particularly where we are right now, perhaps being the space we're investing time into. And what does this mean in terms of pathways for the future of cities? So this is, again, one of the small sketches we use where we talk about, it moves us from thinking about development as a preordained path to a future that's known, and we have the power to do that, to a different kind of approach that really allows for much more emergent themes that in fact expand, not reduce, choice and agency. And again, here, I think you'll see very much the language and thinking of Foresight 3.0, and the idea of alternative pathways that can be created through different forms of engagement. I have for a long time argued that there are 3 levels of decolonizing we would need to do. The first being the decolonizing of the imagination, and this is very powerful, particularly when we speak of space and cities, because in fact there are often some very strong images and imaginaries we have about what it means to be a city, or what it means to be a town, and what buildings look like, and what lifestyle in space look like. And so how do we have new thinking in those spaces? The issue of processes, how do we imagine city making differently? Again, Joe's given some beautiful examples. As a planner, as an architect, we know there are many challenges. And so when we talk about co-creation, co-production, it's not something, in fact, that we do very well. So again, how do new processes perhaps enable different futures? And then, of course, institutionally, how do we allow for new ways of doing things? So having argued for these, I'm going to close with my example, because we were asked what are some examples of this kind of work. And I wanted to share this one that we've been doing. We did actually over the last 2 years, we've concluded this phase now, but I think it can go nicely actually into a City 3.0 exercise. And these were visualization studios that focused on that idea of decolonizing process. So how could you work with residents of a city? And we worked with residents of 9 cities across South Africa last year. We did it virtually because of the pandemic. And what it was really trying to do was to unearth these collective imaginaries that really didn't take as a starting point some imposed idea of what cityness means or what must be important to people. That led us to really amazing and diverse renderings of what cities could look like. And you'll see from, I love this example just because there's very little of it that looked like a traditional architectural rendering of a city, but there's a lot of power in the imaginaries that people have pulled into this kind of an image, and ultimately led to these kinds of themes where people could begin talking about the future of their spaces. And we found a real richness in what people chose to speak of. They chose to speak of healing and community enablement in very different ways that could still feed and inform policy and planning, but with a very different intent, a very different spirit. If you have a moment to read some of these comments, that we're putting band-aids on bullet wounds. Now, which architect or planner could ever have come up with that? And what is the implication of saying that to somebody who's then doing development in a space when communities are articulating that as being what's important to them about their space? So that's just an example coming from our context, playing with process and co-production. I believe very much that the perception that we hold of the future and the processes, the practices we enact about the future, in fact, can colonize the future of ourselves and the futures of others. And therefore, I really welcome the opportunity to experiment much more liberally, I think, with some of these ideas of foresight. And Foresight 3.0, I think, is a really useful framing and an open door. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Gechi, thank you very much for the excellent intervention. Really very inspirational. Thank you again. We'll have you back later. So now I'd like to invite Professor Mark Tudor Jones. Apologies, actually, we didn't include, we missed your name in the conference program, but you are now here and with us. Thanks for being available. Mark is a professor of cities and regions at the Bartlett Center for Advanced Spatial Analysis, Faculty of the Built Environment, University College London. So Mark, I pass the screen to you now.
Thanks very much, Ozcan. I don't have slides, just to give you a little bit of a respite from staring at the screen. So I'll just use my minutes talking about some principles, and it's really good to be involved with this panel and to be involved with this conference as well. I'm going to talk a bit about why foresight is important in terms of cities and regions, but also the challenges. And I know that some of this discussion you've already had about how we try and think about long-term change for cities, but we're in a context where governments increasingly want to think short-term and also want to perhaps be in a situation where they are not challenged about existing policy and existing interventions. So I'm going to make my points with reference to a case study called Newcastle City Futures. And before I rejoined UCL last year, I ran something called Newcastle City Futures at Newcastle University in the north of the UK, which was one of the Future of Cities foresight examples that Joe had mentioned that's been sponsored by the UK government a few years ago. And I ran that for 5 years. So in many ways, even though I'm a scientist, I was right in the middle of trying to develop futures for that city and region with a range of sectors outside the academy, and in this context of trying to make long-term gains in a very short-term context. When we think about cities and regions, of course, it's not just about the key issues that we expect to find, issues about climate change or transport infrastructure or affordable housing. The issue about cities and regions is that all these issues are there and come into play with each other. And that's the biggest challenge about foresight for cities and regions, is the interrelationships and interactions between these competing agendas. And if you factor in then all the agencies and audiences who expect cities to deliver back for them, you can see how much it's a contentious issue trying to carve out a vision and trajectory for the future. As Joe mentioned, and Getchi, that the more complex issues that we have, the more it becomes obvious that single responses or single agency responses cannot do it all. So it's not just about government, it's not just about business, it's not even just about communities or even us as members of the academy. We all have to find ways of working together to understand what's going on, but also think about where we might go. And the idea of changing policy direction to meet those bigger wicked problem goals is slightly problematic, because institutions like governments, let alone universities, take an enormous amount of time to change direction. They're like an oil tanker. They get stuck, and persuading them to change a course of direction, a different path, is immensely challenging. It only happens when there's a shock to the system. And something like COVID has been a terrible shock to the system, which has prompted city governments to change direction very rapidly indeed. The question is, will that be a change for long term, or will it revert back to other ways of doing it? The other point to say is we're also operating in a context where, even though we believe perhaps in foresight and foresight 3.0, there's a greater degree of skepticism about science, and it's certainly about experts. And that's certainly true of the UK, where there's been growing criticism about scientists and judgments about the value of their expertise, the value of science, the value of data, which makes it very difficult for us to be in a position of trying to convince others, politicians included, about the relevance of our work and the relevance of adopting these methodologies as well. So what this means is, if we're going to work on long-term problems in cities and regions, they will be less linear, less discrete, and also more challengeable as well. So if we are going to employ foresight and try our best to do it, the question is, who initiates foresight? For what purpose is it intended? And where will it sit in the wider context of government, society, and scientific expertise? Those questions need to be addressed before we even begin to embark on a foresight exercise. Now, having worked on the Newcastle experience, I've learned some issues on the back of it, and I probably got grayer in the process because it was an immense challenge to do, and I did age considerably, as you can tell, by it as well. But I came up with these principles, and they might be useful for the discussion going on. Adopt a working method for mapping and scenario work with regards to context and place and time. This is not an off-the-shelf set of principles. These have to be embedded in particular cities and regions to make them workable and observable. What you want is it to be a trusted device and method for everyone outside the academy to say it's useful. That means it has to be relevant to what they can see in their own city and region. So adaptability is very important. The second issue is, how is it legitimized? Who legitimizes the foresight exercise? Is this something that just academics do? Or is it external to government partners who embark on it? And how does government react? So what legitimacy does it have to do the work? Because that's important to communicate to participants about the value of the work coming out from foresight. Where does it go to? Who's going to use it? Think about those things up front. The third point, think about the long term. So having a 2050, 2060 perspective is really useful because you can avoid short-term election cycles. You can avoid the here and now by constantly getting people to think about the long-term futures as a destination and as a goal for discussion. Mapping work is really important, and that has to be about the positives and negatives of a city and region. You can't hide from the negatives about all the downsides of what's going on in a place, as well as the positives. The combination of positive and negatives about an individual place will speak about the likely set of scenarios that could be developed which leads ultimately to possible intervention and policy change. And that means admitting to failures about what went wrong in the past. Just because something was successful in 1990 or 2000 doesn't mean it could be workable today, because time and place changes demonstrably. So there has to be a backcasting exercise about how did we get here and from where and where we might be likely to go in the future. Everyone participating must be made aware of the purpose of foresight and what will happen to the outcomes. And that means adopting a range of tools. Getty mentioned about a range of creative methods. That's absolutely the case. You need to have a range of creative methods that are deployed at different stages in order to carry on and keep momentum in the discussion. And that could include, for example, high use of visualizations, imagery, filmic work, anything that's not policy wording, and certainly not academic speak, because that will be the ultimate way that you turn off people and they won't buy into what you're doing. Final few points, and then I'll stop. Because of the complexity of cities and the array of different actors who together provide services in cities, a foresight exercise for a city really needs to be a collaborative effort. It needs to be a way that different agencies can work together. And I found certainly in Newcastle that I spent a lot of my time just doing the joining up, not being the scientist telling people the evidence, but actually coercing them into working together. So I think for cities, for people in foresight, we need to take on the role of facilitators, enablers, to understand the evidence and data and science, make them meaningful and visible, but also find ways that we can work together as well. It's about opening up the conversations, not closing them down. Just because new conversations don't fit existing policy and don't fit existing ways of academic thinking doesn't mean to say that they're not valuable. They are valuable, because that's where transformation and innovation is going to come from, rather than existing ways of looking at the world. So don't close down discussions just because it doesn't relate to the here and now. Work on impediments and the difficulties, and there will always be those, but save them for later. And what we're talking about really is a cycle of conversations, not a linear process which will lead to an end point, but a continual cycle of conversations and methods to be brought to bear. And failure, as well as success, will be part of that process. But your job is essentially to keep the momentum and spirit of doing things going all the way through. Above all, in cities, for this sort of method, my experience is shared outcomes are the most valuable, and they need to be celebrated as joint efforts as well. So if you are working in the space of a range of different actors, the outcomes can be shared by all, and that in turn supports the method, supports the exercise you've done, and will involve more people then wanting to join the activity as time goes on. And I think I've overshot my time anyway, but thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for this excellent points and insights from your experience. We greatly appreciate it. So we are now moving to Wendy Schultz. Wendy will talk about emerging methods, tools, processes, and know-how, and then we'll see if we can apply them to our futures thinking. Wendy.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. I do have a few slides, mostly to keep me on point. And would just say that I think this this panel is bringing you a very coherent, very coherent message in a lot of ways, which is interesting. So one of the things, Joe, you had a cunning plan, I can tell, in proposing this particular group of people. So one of the challenges is to talk a little bit about how COVID changes the context. So I'd like to start off with a quote from the science fiction writer Kim Stanley Robinson. "The virus is rewriting our imaginations. what felt impossible has become thinkable. We're getting a different sense of our place in history. We know we're entering a new world. We seem to be learning our way into a new structure of feeling. And so I'm here to tell you what I think is the good news, and it's possibly a little bit perverse, but the pandemic era, in my experience and from talking to the rest of the futures community, and presumably the Foresight community embedded within that, is that the pandemic era has been very, very good to us. And in many ways, looking back on 40 years of work in future studies and foresight, this is really the golden age of distributed, decentralized futures explorations. And an awful lot of doors are opening that we might not have imagined in the past, and many doors are opening that should have been opened long ago. And what I'd like to briefly do, because I'm not a city planner, I'm not an urban planner, and I'm coming here primarily to talk a little bit about methods and tools, because I kind of collect futures and foresight methods and activities rather like a magpie collecting shiny things. So what for me maybe begins as a base is what I think of as the 3 5s of futures fluency. And this is a bit of a work in progress, but roughly speaking, when we're engaged in futures thinking, we're enhancing our own and others' awareness of change. We're engaging in a critical look at change, at its impacts, who is bearing the weight and cost of those impacts, who is benefiting from and being empowered by them. We're exploring alternative possible futures, of course. That's frequently what futures researchers are best known for, right? Scenario exploration. Envisioning and negotiating preferred futures and acting to create change in the present, because if we're not changing what we do in this moment and this moment and this moment, then all of the rest of it is creative imagination, but really has no particular impact on creating different futures. And there are a range of mental skills that we have to engage in this. It's not all about logical extrapolation and logical forecasting. There's obviously a lot of creative thinking involved in really coming up with vivid, provocative, challenging images of alternative possibilities in the future. We need to think systemically, and by that I mean make those interconnections that Mark was talking about, think across and around and beyond the bounds of different disciplines, think critically about our own assumptions and biases and the assumptions and biases that are built into the structures and ways of approaching things in the world and institutions, and think empathically about what we do engaging in futures research, what impacts that has, how different people engage in it, and avoid essentially epistemicide, which is a fantastic new word. But the other thing that we have to bear in mind when we're engaging in futures thinking, foresight, forecasting, futures exploration, all of this, is that we don't approach these ideas with a neutral emotional perspective, that we come to our thinking about the future with our curiosity involved, looking at and looking for novelties. Hopefully we come with our senses of humor engaged to give us a little perspective on the relative importance of what we're considering, and the various different enriching contradictions that are in thinking through intersecting issues and their impacts in terms of change. I hope that we come to this with a sense of awe, both that combination of humility and wonder about how truly very different the future could be, and how that might be both completely wonderful and completely terrible. A sense of forgiveness, because so many mistakes have been made in the past. We hope to make fewer in the future. or at least different mistakes in the future, but that means that we have to come to the future with a sense of forgiveness and, quite frankly, a sense of love for what is possible and a willingness to embrace and be very open in thinking about the future. So when we talk about engaging people broadly, we have to remember we're engaging the whole person. And I caught a little bit, Ozan, of the previous session, and right at the end there, you were talking about the senses, right? What does the future smell like? What does it taste like? What does it feel like? Is it a harsh wind against your skin, or is it a soft breeze? You know, what are you hearing in the future? And I think that's part of it as well. So the point of all of that is that that brings us to, you know, this amazing moment we are experiencing. And I'm sure throughout history, people have said, this is a stunning moment of high turbulence and chaos. And so this happens to everybody. But this is our stunning moment of turbulence. And the turbulence of this present moment is rewriting the possible futures second by second by second. So the possibility spaces of the outcomes from this chaos are shaped by sensitive dependence on initial conditions. That's what chaos theory tells us. What we need to learn from that is that we can be those differing initial conditions. Each of us has the potential to be the butterfly that flaps its wings. So what are different ways we can enact Foresight 3.0? So some of the differentiating characteristics between Foresight 3.0 and what Joe has elaborated as Foresight 1.0 and 2.0 is that potentially, in its best form, it would be distributed, decentralized, participatory, diverse, systemic, emergent, and I'm sure there are other distinguishing characteristics, but this was my first stab. And by distributed, we're already seeing some interesting approaches to doing that in distributing horizon scanning and the awareness of change across kind of team and community hubs. And there are a variety of different software platforms that let you do that. We're decentralizing, massively decentralizing, collecting not only signals of change across populations, but images of the future and narratives of the future by the potential for using crowdsourcers and interconnected communications and computing platforms. We're getting much better and more creative, quite frankly, about participatory approaches to futures in terms of building interactive games, experiential exhibits that people can walk into new ideas about the future. 7 Siblings from the Future is an example from Finland's Sitra. Diverse, there has been a stunning, and Getchi embodied this and explained the work and the approaches she's taking and her colleagues are taking. There's been some really stunning work in getting much more deeply and expansively into decolonizing the future in the last 10 years or so. And I say that as someone who first heard the phrase from Zia Sardar, you know, in the sort of 90s, the focus on decolonizing the future. Systemic, the notion that we do understand that all of these problems are linked and interconnected, that you can't talk about, for example, vulnerability of women and children without talking about climate change and the stress it puts on systems and what that does to conflict and how conflict creates even greater vulnerability among marginalized populations. So everything is interlinked. And the other fun thing is that we also have a greater recognition of the fact that the futures are emergent, as are our capabilities to come together and create completely new adaptations to some of the challenges that we face. So some examples, distributed examples, and these are just a few. So let me take a slight break here. On the mural board, since you can load actual papers and things on the mural board, I will upload a collection I have of different futures platforms and Foresight platforms that can be used to do some of this stuff. A document that inventories about more than a dozen different ways to do visioning in communities. So there are a lot of resources out there, and they're always being improved, and they are currently being extended by a lot of these shifts into distributed, decentralized, and participatory efforts. So distributed scanning, there are platforms like Futures Radar and Factor. Decentralized and crowdsourcing, Futurescaper can be used to crowdsource emerging and weak signals of change and trends, and crowdsourcing essentially futures wheels and impact cascades, what will happen to those trends. SenseMaker allows us, and there are a few other similar platforms, allows us to collect actual narratives of what are some of the emerging issues of change? What are emerging narratives of change? What are images of change out there? So we could, in this day and age, literally go out to a city and say, we would like to collect the images of the future, your baseline images of the future that everyone in the city has. And then from the baseline perspectives, start a conversation about, again, what entirely new things might emerge. Different participatory games. The Institute for the Future has a long history of supporting online participatory games. Nesta supported the Global Swarm in collecting a fantastic set of participatory exercises in organizations and communities and international networks on participatory approaches to envisioning futures. There's been a lot of work in artifacts and museum exhibits that express provocative potential futures that enable people to kind of visit the future in interesting ways. In supporting diversity, the Center for Postnormal Policy and Future Studies, which I'm affiliated with, has been working a lot on polylogs to basically explore what Zia Sardar has been calling mutually assured diversity and conversations with respect for diversity of perspective, and the very strong efforts in decolonizing futures. Pupul Bisht and a whole team of people, whole group of people are focusing on that. It's a, as I said, an incredibly welcome worldwide conversation that's being supported by a lot of people. And the School of International Futures is one. Systemic approaches, Shift N does a lot of work in systemic foresight, and the OCAD Strategic Foresight Training Program includes teaching their graduate students to create gigamaps, which are systemic explorations of issues that then explore how different changes will affect the system of an issue and what that might mean for possible futures. Deep Transitions is taking a very interesting approach in creating scenarios of desirable futures by saying, here's the system that we currently have, and rather than talking about how that system will be transformed by exogenous changes, is instead saying, to get to desirable futures, what if we change the rules? Following Donella Meadows' sort of famous places to exert leverage on a system. What if we take the system as it currently is and institute an entirely different set of rules by which it functions? Where does that take us? And again, we have all these emergent possibilities that in many ways were enhanced again by the pandemic situation of people learning to use online whiteboards like Mural and Miro, the possibility of artificial intelligence and of all of us as, and by all of us, I literally mean the planet, hopefully at some point in the future, thinking about the future hand in hand with artificial intelligence in various ways, and Shaping Tomorrow may be the very beginning of that in a lot of the work it's doing in AI scanning and analysis in future studies. But I really am excited about the fact that many of us were driven to do our workshops online using a combination of Teams or Zoom and Miro boards, and creating amazing mindscapes of these critical conversations about change, about the future, about where we might all go. And you've seen that over the last year in a lot of the conferences and colloquia like this one that have been able to share their Miro boards with everyone. So this is really a moment of fantastic opportunity to expand the contribution of everyone in a city, in a village, in a community, in a region, to thinking about the future and thinking about it creatively, systemically, critically. So to end, but again, at every moment, we are faced with decisions. So Varoufakis said with regard to this moment of sort of the great pause. We are sitting on a saddle point, prepared to tip in either direction, and it is at the moment utterly indeterminate which of two directions we travel. So are we traveling into a future where we will be engaging with each other in Foresight 3.1, or are we not? And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you for all the conceptual and methodological contributions to Foresight 3.0. This is very much appreciated. So now I'm moving to our next speaker, Fabiana Scapola. Fabiana will talk about Future of Governance Policy Lab experience.
Thank you, Özcan. Let me share my slides. 1 second, because I have an issue with it. Yeah, it's coming now, maybe. No. Sorry, there is an issue with the slide.
They feel like it's coming, so almost here.
Just in the gap, I will just mention, I'm trying to write down what people are saying, either by slides or by interpretation of the key questions on the whiteboard. The link is on here now. And as we move towards the second interactive session, I'm encouraging people to contribute on this whiteboard. And we can talk about how exactly that works in half an hour, but I look forward to that.
Yeah.
You can have a look already.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, for taking notes, actually, because they're very important messages, I think, coming from the speakers, and we should definitely use this to, you know, improve the concept further, to develop it, and then when we plan the next workshop, we can build on this experience so that we can create this snowballing effect, if you like. So these are all very valuable. And we will use the whiteboards, our records, of course, for the previous activities.
Yeah, we're not only talking about Foresight, but doing it. Oh, yeah, I can show your slides, or someone else can show your slides. Fabiana, should I show your slides?
And let me see if I manage.
So I have them here.
It should be coming. No, it says there is a problem. I have a problem apparently with sharing the slides. So
Okay.
if you can share the slide for me,
Sure.
that would be very good. And apologies for this.
No
problem. Yeah.
Just coming up now.
So it's actually a challenge to come as the last speaker, because I have to say that I can echo everything that was said up to now. So my challenge is now to maybe come and say something interesting. So just to give an idea to people that don't know me, I am the head of the Competence Center of Foresight of the European Commission, but I also lead the EU Policy Lab, that is, you know, a collaborative and experimental space for innovative policy making, yeah, there is an echo, so maybe
there's some echo. If everybody can mute except Fabiana, then I think we will stop it happening. Yes, Fabiana.
Yeah,
go
ahead. In this space, what we do, we explore and reframe issue, and also we co-create a user-centered solution. We try to think visually and systematically, engage diversity of stakeholders, including citizens, and you know, prototype, experiment, and test a different way to do policy making at EU level, which I have to say it's a bit of a challenge. So in these few slides, what I also want to do is to show you where we are at European level in terms of mainstreaming strategic foresight. Next slide, please. So in 2020, there was the first Commission publication of the first strategic foresight report. And that was making a call, especially due to COVID, on the need of anticipatory governance at all governance level, from international up to local. And as also Wendy was saying, you know, COVID-19 has really exposed countries, regions, cities, citizens to a number of vulnerabilities and disruptions. And here we have an opportunity, because strategic foresight now can have a key role to play to ensure that policy are future-proof, and also it can also help to ensure that policies that have a long-term perspective implied also a short-term initiative that can be started now. So in this report, what we did, we provided a systematic analysis of the vulnerabilities and capacities that were revealed by the COVID crisis across 4 dimensions of resilience. And we also have looked at what are the opportunities and how strategic foresight can be fostered to identify this opportunity. And when, next slide, please. And when we look at particularly to cities, the vulnerabilities that appeared, and which will not be new to you, is that, of course, COVID is spreading much more quickly in urban dense area and poor neighborhoods. And over 70% of European population at the moment lives in cities. And of course, this number is expected to increase to 80% to 2050, which also will create pressure to city infrastructure. But there are also capacities that cities have, and urban areas have capacities that some of their rural counterparts still lack, such as being close to health facilities and digital infrastructures. And it is possible to strengthen and opportunities that is possible to strengthen resilience in urban areas. Next slide, please. So here, what we have seen is that strategic foresight has a key role to explore future-proof solutions at urban level, and by creating strong partnership with citizens and local businesses as key for success. And participatory governance and collective engagement need to be reinforced towards what it is a more fair and sustainable future. And also what strategic foresight can help doing is to unveil an innovative solution in cities and strengthening through forward-looking policies. And cities also have the key role in attaining the ambitious policy targets outlined in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and also in some of the European Union policy initiative like Green Deal. But what cities are also able to do is they are, they are really can be test bed for innovation and solution, not only to city problems, but also to then be amplified to larger scale, and it is possible at city level to connect much easily those directly affected with innovator, investor, and startup. If I move a bit more, next slide, please, to what are the lessons learned, and I don't know if this is really Foresight 3.0, to be more effective in relation to foresight, is that it is important that foresight is systemic, and especially if this is done with some policy, with some ambition to engage in policy discussion and have some policy recommendation. And this is very important because all the issue that we are facing at the moment, it's not only about COVID, they cut across boundaries, and especially policy ones. So it is important to get out policy cycle. And foresight need to be participated, and it's not only about involving stakeholders to collective intelligence, to generate collective intelligence, but we should use method and tools to engage with stakeholders. And in some cases, this can still be a challenge, because not everywhere the culture of foresight has permeated across policymakers. And what it is also important to do is to highlight, and especially now after the COVID crisis, what are the costs of not doing foresight? So what are the costs of not engaging with the future? And in terms of methods, the experience that we are having is saying that, you know, it is very important to be both qualitative, quantitative, and visual. So what we have done in one exercise, in one study that we carried out, we very much work with designer. Here, the call on qualitative and quantitative tools is also to still be able to be concrete, because policymakers still have this impression that data and numbers are easy they are more telling than narrative, but in general we should use all the knowledge sources that we have available. And I think it is also the role of foresight to be bold, and so to really push this cultural change in policymaking, and to engage in discussion that sometimes are not the discussion that policymakers want to have, but discussing what are the blind spots and what uncertainty mean in terms of policy. And but in order to keep the engagement with them, I think it's very important to be concrete and be very specific on the action that can be started now, in order just not to have foresight as a sort of to be seen as a sort of a nice collective intelligent exercise, but which is nice to have, but not where we need to act. And here we have to be very specific on what are the innovations that anticipatory thinking brings to current policies. And I don't know, Austin, can you tell me if I have still a bit of time?
I think, yeah, you can take another 2-3 minutes, Fabiana.
Yeah, it was just to show,
Sure.
next slide, please, that we did a study that was before COVID, which was looking at how future government in 2030 and beyond could look like. And here we have developed some scenario, and which I will not go into much detail about it, because I can share also later the detail on the report. But basically this was a study that was really focusing on how governments and the relation with citizen and business might look like in 2030 and beyond, and what can be some policy implication. And what was interesting about this exercise was that we did it in collaboration with different member states and policy labs across member states. We were working in very close collaboration with Austria, Malta, Ireland, Sweden, Spain, Poland, and Belgium. And so what was very interesting is that through this policy lab, we have worked directly with citizens. And what was very interesting to see is that the insights that citizens bring are as much as relevant as the insights that experts bring. So this is a call of even some of the foresight type of work to step out from this more expert-based type of work, even if coming from the Commission, I have to say that it is much easier for us at Commission level to, claim that a foresight study was developed with a number of very well-known scientists and experts and business people than with citizens. And What we did also, next slide, and which could be interesting from a city perspective, and we have worked a lot with students of design from 6 design schools all across Europe. It was also UK, Italy, Spain, Switzerland, and Poland. And what we asked, what we did, we created prototypes and concepts based on this scenario, on how governments and public service will look like in the future. And also we have developed a game that can be used very much at city level or at local level, because this game uses people's anticipatory assumption about what the future might look like to generate interesting conversation, negotiation, and also collaboration. And we have tested this game in a number of occasions, and it proved to be very interesting. The game is also there, available for everyone that wants to use it. It's online, and it is also generating a participatory setting in which debates can take place. And in this sense, it can be an interesting tool to be used at local level to engage with citizens around very specific local issues and to test potential policy impact of future policies. So, and with this, I would like to stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Mm-hmm. Many thanks, Fabiana. That was a great presentation. Again, as you said, there's a great consensus actually about the key principles of Foresight 3.0. And it is very interesting to hear that from different directions of the Foresight world, whether it's from urban cities or from policy-making perspectives or from the practitioner perspective. I think it's great, so we can understand like our key reference points for designing our future Foresight theories and practice. So you weren't actually the last speaker in this session. So we still have Ian. He has the hard job of bringing all this together and synthesizing all these messages and then extracting something interesting for us. So Ian, we have great expectations from you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you.
That's good. I can see and hear Özcan right now, but I'm going to try to show a couple of PowerPoints which I've put together. So let us see if that is going to be possible. Heaven knows if it's possible. I'm going to try to find the right screen. Yeah, okay, let's see if that will work. Can you? I can't see anything showing as usual.
Yeah. From the share tray, you may choose desktop and
yeah. Ian, you could email them to me.
You can
show them.
Yeah.
Just proves you should always email your slides before the session.
Yes, that is. It's particularly hard when your slides are meant to be produced during the session. Of course.
Exactly. Yeah, that was the challenge with Ian.
I'm not. Yeah, I'm not getting anywhere with this. So, well, let me just talk. While I will try to send Joe some slides, but who knows what
your slide.
Yeah, you can just email them quickly and then we can see.
Yeah. Okay, so I will email them to I'm not even going
preferably to everyone. they can
okay, let me just talk through what I would be showing. I can look at it myself.
Just to say, Ian, you can put them directly onto the whiteboard. You just go to the whiteboard, select all your slides, and just move them on. It's like magic. I was amazed when I first discovered. Yeah. So that is another option.
It is amazing what happens if your information technology systems all work properly, isn't it? Unfortunately, mine are not permitting me to do any of these sensible things, right? And that is despite having 2 computers and a phone running. So I look forward to this great future when we're going to be able to do all of these things seamlessly. I can see what it's going to be like. I can see what it actually almost could be today, but it isn't for me. And I keep having this problem with online meetings, which is a great shame because clearly online meetings are where we're at. Okay, well, before this meeting, I prepared a slide, or I'd started preparing a set of slides, and it was just about the question of Foresight 3.0 and where we could locate it. And I was thinking, well, what we need to do is look a bit about where Foresight has come from. I'm not sure that I really accept the idea that we've gone through these neat generations of Foresight work. So I tried, I had the idea, well, let me try to map out different Foresight studies and map them on in terms of a couple of dimensions. And one would be how far the studies focused on a very specific, sharp problem, or were very heavily reliant upon dealing with one set of opportunities or issues for one organization, as opposed to activities that try to be much more global or encompass many, many different issues. In any case, if you're looking at a city, it wouldn't just be future employment in the city or future housing in the city, and so on. Or if you're looking at artificial intelligence, it wouldn't just be artificial intelligence's impact on employment or on governance or things like that. So that was one dimension. And the other dimension was the extent to which the methods used and the range of sources of expertise involved are relatively low, as opposed to approaches where you're using multiple methods, qualitative and quantitative, for example, as Fabiana was saying recently, very wide participation or very limited participation, as a lot of people have been saying. And so I came up with these 2 different dimensions of both of them as sort of relatively narrow approaches versus very wide approaches. And I began trying to plot what is going on in the futures field and then the Foresight field from the 60s on in terms of this. And while it's a bit easy to plot some of the highlights of each of these decades, the more I thought about it, the more it was obvious that there was activity of all sorts going on in most of these decades. That's the first thing to say. So eventually I gave up my simple mapping activity. But what I could see was that the whole matrix, this whole space, was becoming much, much more populated as we went on over time. So I think it was Wendy said that, we're at a period of great expansion of futures work and of Foresight work within that. And that's clearly the case. We're at a period right now where there are many groups pursuing many approaches, often using different methods, often using a relatively small range of methods, but very rarely just using one method. Sometimes you'll find that people will be doing a modeling study or a scenario workshop study or something like that. But much more often we're seeing a lot of different methods being employed with varying levels of participation of wider or narrower sets of stakeholders, sometimes dealing with very specific issues, recovery from the pandemic, sometimes dealing with very much broader sets of issues. So that is my first point, and that's something which I've heard echoed in a lot of the presentations today. So I'm glad I was able to guess that in advance. And the question that I'd like to pose for our thinking as we go on is, when we're talking about Foresight 3.0, are we talking about an area in this sort of framework, so an area presumably of wide studies using multiple approaches, involving a lot of different stakeholders and participations, democratizing foresight as far as possible, decolonizing foresight as far as possible, addressing a broad range of issues, not just narrowly focusing on the economic or the sociological and so on. Is Foresight 3.0 mainly a space within this world of all sorts of different futures approaches? Or is it also sort of a metaphor point, Foresight 3.0? In other words, something that's trying to bring together and articulate and draw upon many of these different activities. Maybe, you know, it's not an either or. Maybe a 3.0 has to be a meta foresight of some sort. Anyway, I'll just leave that. That was my first thought. And then I wanted to take up points surrounding where we're at right now. And again, Wendy was saying we're very much at a potential turning point. We could have an effort to return to the old normal, or we could have some completely new sort of approach. And it seemed to me that the pandemic, it certainly presents all sorts of challenges and opportunities. But one of the things that we need to be aware of is that it's likely to result in a lot of diverse responses. I mean, we've already seen countries behaving in extremely different ways during this pandemic. And the same is true at lower levels of multi-level governance, cities and organizations of all sorts. My expectation would be that we will continue to see a diversity of approaches, and we will see big efforts to get back as far as possible on historic tracks and trajectories, and we will see big efforts to move in new ways. And I captured this in terms of 3 A's, really, that to some extent, what we've seen in the pandemic is an acceleration of particular trends, and we've talked about digitalization as one of these trends. It's not that all sorts of digitalization have been accelerated, certain sorts, like online conferences and the problems they cause me and some other people. We've seen an amplification of some issues, a bringing to awareness in particular of all sorts of social inequalities, power imbalances, privileges and lack of privileges that we have in our society. And I don't think it's any coincidence at all that Black Lives Matter has grown to be of such significance over the past year. And that's not going to go away. The third thing I use in another word beginning with A, which is agitate. And that is that the crisis has problematized many existing trajectories, and many people have been questioning their existing ways of life because they've seen that there are aspects of new ways of life that are very evident as a result of the crisis. It's been quieter. We've been able to hear the birds singing. We've been able to breathe fresher air, things of this sort. So I would say that what we have seen and what we're witnessing right now is maybe we can think of it in 2 ways. There's impacts upon the sorts of things we could be looking at in foresight. We've seen the large-scale social change is possible, that even national governments can introduce large changes which we would never have expected given their ideological predispositions. And yes, there's been resistance to this sort of change, and it's very important to look at the sources and forms of resistance. But a lot has happened as a result of this crisis. So one issue for foresight, of course, is to think about, well, what could future crises do? What sorts of, because there are going to be future crises, there are going to be all sorts of things happening in the future. What sorts of things are allowed to provoke what sorts of change into the future? How long-lived is this change going to be? I think Mark Tudor-Jones was introducing this point. Are we seeing a blip, or are we seeing something that is going to be much more ingrained and embedded? And again, I would say what we're likely to see is a mixture of all sorts of responses, where efforts to return to normal, efforts to create slight reformist shifts to the normal situation, efforts to create all sorts of major transformations in how societies operate. I would anticipate we will see multiple outcomes in multiple geographical spaces, in different cities, in different countries, in different areas of life, and among different communities. A lot of opportunity for experimentation and learning, of course. A lot of opportunity for harmony, a lot of opportunity for discord. And then the second big thing is that the role of foresight will change. And Mark introduced this as a starting point, the question of what is legitimacy, the undermining of expertise in a lot of populist discourse. But also, there's a sensible critique of expertise as well. We've seen much failure of expertise in the pandemic, and much misunderstanding of the nature of expertise and the role of expertise and the nature of science itself. And well, this is a topic for foresight work, but it's also something that very much influences how we may be able to conduct foresight work, with what sorts of legitimacy, with what sorts of communication with different stakeholders and things like that. And we have certainly learned that we need to upgrade our communications. We need to do better because we've had pandemics on our risk radar, and we've had pandemics featured usually marginally in many foresight exercises. I can only think of one where, which was a mainstream foresight study where pandemics featured to a major degree, and the nature of infectious diseases was very much highlighted. Normally, it gets mentioned as just one of the things that might happen and where we need to be paying some attention, but there's another 13 things we also need to be looking at. Yes, but I think is the conclusion as a result of this. Foresight more generally needs to reflect on how we relate to other areas of futures-oriented activity, like risk analysis, like emergency planning, like resilience processes, the governance, the thinking about the very governance structures we have in play for these sorts of things. And to wrap up, I think a few lessons that we need to learn from this crisis, as well as just general humility, is that well, things can catch us. Even things we think of quite a lot in foresight are liable to catch us unawares, because typically we don't see enough aspects of the big changes that may happen. And most sort of so-called wild cards, and not just wild cards, they're whole packs of cards. All sorts of developments are likely to pop up surprisingly as a result of one or other major development that we have thought of, but we thought of in limited ways. And distant early warnings are largely ignored. One lesson we have, though, is that in this pandemic, some countries have performed particularly well. Most of those are countries where they've had more recent experience of dealing with similar crises. And there must be some lessons in this for us about rehearsals, about setting up of networks and the like. Another lesson is that there have been rapid responses, many fantastic rapid responses, often in a bottom-up manner. And several people mentioned the need for social innovation, the need for bottom-up initiative. Geki was saying this, for example. Often at a city level, or even areas within cities, the explosion of community groups using WhatsApp and the like to help deal with the pandemic at a local level is really, really refreshing. And we also see, at an international level, scientists, for example, getting together establishing new networks and communities, which have actually turned out to be vital in sharing critical information about, for example, the nature of the virus and the nature of response. Sometimes this information has been suppressed by national governments and even by respected international organizations. You may have seen a news item just yesterday on the WHO's non-communication of evidence about the Italian pandemic, for example, in a timely fashion for other countries to learn from. But the bottom-up strategies for improving communications within communities at a local level, at an international level, at all levels, prove to be really, really important here. Yes, but of course, misinformation spreads as well, and not all rapid responses are positive responses. And we see, for example, in this country, there's been many experiences of businesses, for example, acting in a very altruistic way. Beer companies producing alcohol, for example, for sanitizers, all sorts of activities of that sort. We've also seen more unscrupulous people moving into making huge amounts of money, profiteering on the sourcing and sale of protective equipment and the like. And networks to expose that sort of activity are also proving to be very important. Okay, I better be winding up, I think. There are many other lessons that could be drawn, but I think I would come back to the need for us to think, in the case of Foresight 3.0, how we're going to be able to link our activities in this area with all sorts of other activities that are going on. And obviously top of the list right now is emergency, risk and resilience management activities of various sorts. How these already exist, so how can these be turbocharged and much better informed by wider Foresight work? Okay, thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Ian. So that was like a great intervention. I mean, very, thought-provoking ideas, and Joe has captured some of them.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
Yeah, so he is now directing us to the Foresight space, the co-working area. But before probably going into that, shall we give a short break, like for people to breathe and take their at least eyes from the screen for a few minutes?
I think some people have to leave, so a big thanks to people who have to leave, who contributed, etc. On the program, we said we would have some coffee in the virtual 3D space, and you're very welcome. 5-minute break or something, and then so let's say at 17:15 Moscow time. I will then explain the process for the next steps, and I'm hoping that as many as possible people can be part of this very interesting process, which will focus on the whiteboard. So, and here you see, work in progress on the whiteboard. Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
So
there have been some comments on the chat board. So, well, maybe some questions too. Let's use this co-working space actually to interact with each other, and maybe you may find the people that you want to talk to directly from the application. So
okay, well, maybe I'll just mention now, so you can think about it over coffee. I think the most useful way to proceed is to say, okay, I have some really practical questions. How do we do this thing? It's fine when we have these meetings and, oh yes, very strategic and participative, etc. But I walk out the door, it's a hostile environment for the most part, and beyond, the narrow rooms of, foresight and futures thinking and so on. So these are the 6 questions most coming from the discussion so far. I have my own ideas. Well, the case study which I mentioned is then mapped out over here, but I think first there's an intermediate stage, and if I could ask your advice for your best ideas, how to answer these questions, particularly the most practical. We've had a lot of theory, so let's get to the practical. And anyway, so let's come back to that in 5 minutes.
Yeah, sure.
Could I ask a question? Sorry, could I ask a question?
Yes, sure, Wendy, please go
Very
ahead.
quick. So when we come back in 5 minutes, we'll have Teams open so we can talk and also be using Mural.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, we are exploring the 3D what's-its.
If you want to. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Quite
If you
often.
have 2-3 computers or screens.
Yes, exactly. How many screens you have? Which are the most useful tools for what?
Well, the Teams is good for talking.
No, sorry. I'm actually looking at your Mural board. You have key themes and pilots. Which are the most useful tools?
Yeah.
So if we list a tool, should we also say, and this is what it's useful for? Because different tools are useful for different things.
I should say here actually for city and region or work. Yeah, because the theme of this session is particularly cities and regions. Okay.
Right, but okay. But there's a lot you could do. I mean, there are a lot of different issues, questions, things that you could do in just a city regional project. But that's okay. That's okay. We'll work it out on the board.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah.
Let's play your cards at the board. So.
Play your cards. See you in a moment.
Okay, see you in a moment. Yeah.
Is that Joe?
Yes, hi, Ian.
Hi, Joe. We could hear you very loudly shutting a door and sighing.
Oh, sorry.
We heard you loudly shutting a door and sighing. I'm just going to go and get myself a drink.
Sure, yeah.
I'm sorry about the mess with my presentation.
Oh, no worries, it happens, yeah. But
it happens every time for me.
Well, if you can send them in advance, then it makes everything smoother and easier. Yeah. Anyhow, it was fine.
Joe?
Oh, Gashi, hi. How are you?
Hey, good. Do you need us to stay on for this next bit?
Well, if you can, it will be very useful to you and everything you do.
Yes, yes, yes.
I
I'd
appreciate
like
you're
to.
super busy, you know.
Yes, I'd like to. Only that I'll have to be screen off because I have to kind of multitask, but I
Sure.
would like to participate if that's okay. And I'll maybe comment on the board as we go along if that's okay.
That would be great. Yeah, fantastic.
Super.
Yeah.
Thank you for this.
Getchy, and do we have your slides? They were
Oh.
fantastic. It was a terrific presentation. Thank you so much.
Yes, no, sure. Happy to send those. I didn't actually. I'll send them right away.
Yeah. Oh, well, I can distribute. They will be all the slides from the whole conference, so it will be available after. But
Fantastic.
if you want to have a look, they're actually on the mural right now.
Oh yes, I saw Joe had put them on there.
So this is the new technique. I'm very enthused with this way of working. You put the slides up, and then you can see exactly what's going on. Oh, here you are. Actually, I missed a couple because I was just grabbing them off the screen.
Well, and what I may do is update mine because I actually can add in some
Sure.
specific links to things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, please do. Yeah. Just send them through. Or, well, as I now discover, from a PowerPoint, you just copy the whole set, dump them on the screen on the mural. What could be more simple and amazing? But then I tell you what, and you might have good ideas. In this process, well, we end up with whole bunches of slides, and in my thinking, oh yeah, this is non-linear thinking. This is what we need to solve non-linear problems. But everybody is used to, and they've grown up with linear kind of discourse. Like, here's the expert, we will look at their slides and ask a couple of questions, and then the next expert, and so on. That's a linear kind of thing. So how do we enable people to practice non-linear thinking? Like 2 or 3 dimensional. So, well, best advice is needed, really. Yeah, so this was partly the idea of setting up this 3D thing, just to see what might happen, and then we put up the results from the workshop onto the 3D. Yeah,
the 3D thing is a little fussy in terms of flying and moving around. I mean, they're kind of fun, but I must say, and I don't use Mural, I use Miro, M-I-R-O, because actually I prefer its capabilities and interface. But having to switch to a combination of Zoom and Miro starting in March of last year has transformed not just interactions with the communities and various people I deal with in organizations, but teaching has gotten, because I was teaching online anyway at Houston, right? Teaching has gotten fantastic. I have, can I share my screen a second?
Sure.
Let me show you. I am so proud of my graduate students. They are amazing. Hold on. This is, we had the largest Foresight graduate class we have ever had in the history of the University of Houston's program. Right. Yeah. We normally have like 12 to 15 people. We had 50. So I built a Miro board where we had interactive exercises for every single class session.
Wow.
And the cool thing about it is that each one of these, I can save this to PDF, and each one of these squares or frames is a page in a PDF. So they have the entire semester's interactive work available to them.
Yeah.
I
like that.
To review. It was so fantastic. And I have all these amazing examples of things to be able to show people and share with people.
Yeah.
And it's so great because you can download, as you point out, you can download pictures, other things. So we just, oh my God, we had so much fun. And my systems class, same thing this semester. Yeah. My systems class is having an amazing time. And as you say, you can put whole slides on. You can also put entire resources. So when I'm having workshops, I put whole PDFs. Have I done that on this one? No. But you can put whole PDFs on, and just people can download a PDF straight from the
Sure.
board. It's just,
Yeah.
seriously, I'm having more fun being stuck at home.
Great. Yeah.
But you do miss some of the sensory aspects of obviously being in a live room with live other people. But.
Oh, totally. And well, we find, yeah, the students, they're like a captive audience. So you can say, oh, yeah, let's do this for an hour and a half, and they usually will do it. If you try and say that to, you know, busy people coming and going, then it's you really have to work hard, you know, to catch them. Anyway, but have you two met, by the way, Geshe?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Just
in Morocco, I think it was that we first met.
Yeah.
Yes, Rabat.
I think so, yeah. I think we've met at least twice, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. So it was great being here again together.
So, so just well, I think that we should be starting again. I'm not sure if our host and chair is in the room. But just
I'm gonna briefly turn off and go away because I got sidetracked talking. I'll be right back.
Sure. Yeah.
Here we go. So, well, Joe, we are all in your hands now.
Okay.
So,
Right. Trust me.
yes, we trust you.
So, well, let me basically work from the screen. You, of course, everybody here is very welcome to access the screen through their own link, which means that then they can put stuff on. And what we are trying to do now is to reflect on the last hour and a half and take on board the messages and then say, okay, what do they mean and how do we move this forward? Because, you know, we've been in many meetings where, you know, ideas go around and around and then the meeting is finished and you have some coffee and then you go away. So, well, for me, you know, the situation is now urgent. The possibilities are huge. I think we can do more. So just to demonstrate what is on the screen so far, well, my presentation is up in the corner. And as you know, the great thing with these online things is you can, you know, zoom in, zoom out to make things small or large, and they're still there. That's a fantastic thing. Mark's presentation, I took notes, and I think he's left now because he's doing a tender proposal. That's the front page of his best project. And I very much respect what he does because he is not only, you know, a leading academic, but also a man of practice and doing stuff. So that is something I take very seriously. Geshe's slides are here, and I find them incredibly, you know, imaginative, provocative, and I just want to kind of dive in. But questions come up all over the place. And well, coming from South Africa, which as I know is, you know, huge challenges, huge opportunities. And some of these challenges are very, very structural. So, and then Wendy's contribution, as you see here, is actually very practical, but also visionary. And she has, you know, an incredibly useful list of tools and techniques and so on, some of which I've worked with. And again, I would like to know more. But and then what else? Oh yeah, Una Lee, if she's still here. Yeah, well, she was very keen, so she supplied a whole set of notes before and about the response to the pandemic and what this means in terms of foresight, etc. And Ian has contributed, well, again, just taking brief notes here. Some of these themes advanced could be, you know, queried and elaborated, obviously. And I think that Fabiana's contribution is here, and I particularly liked the last little bit of the, you know, scenarios for government 2030 and ways to do it in practical terms. So at this point, I'm looking as far as possible for your best ideas on comments and responses to these very urgent and practical questions. And let's just make sure that in all of these, the focus is in cities and regions. Not to say that nothing else is important, but that's just what we're trying to focus on today. Okay, other sessions will have a different focus. The next one coming up after the summer will be on artificial intelligence, or collective human artificial intelligence, you know, which could involve cities and regions, but also involves a whole load of other stuff. Now, at this point, some people would break into groups. I think we are not so many in numbers, and there isn't so much time. So I would have not proposed to break into groups. In fact, I don't have the technology to do that from here. But I think a discussion, which is partly in verbal terms here on the Teams platform, and then where people, as far as possible, are encouraged to provide responses to these questions. And again, the focus being on foresight in cities and regions. Where that goes after that, and I'll just mention, we have a template. And this template comes, well, it's published in the big book, which if anyone didn't already spot it, it looks like this, Deeper City, Collective Intelligence. And the book is based on a methodology for mapping collective intelligence. The methodology has a set of templates. This is the kind of expanded template. Depending on where we go in either in this session or the follow-up, we can use, you know, the whole template or just pieces of it and so on. And just to explain the template, for which you're also invited to contribute, it's very simple. We map the actors involved around the table, the stakeholders. We map their value systems. Is it economic? Is it political? Is it social or environmental? And we map how things work, either the foresight process or the, you know, urban planning process, which foresight is trying to help, maybe, and so on. And you can see here these comments come from my previous notes on gaps and barriers. And in the template, so, okay, we'll put all the gaps and barriers and problems on one side, and then on the other side, when we get to it, we'll put all the solutions and pathways and opportunities with the same mapping. So probably this will take place in the follow-up later on. But first, I think the important thing to do is to just provide answers or responses to these questions. So if you have any expertise, any experience, any ideas, please put them on the screen now. It's very easy. You just double click. There's a post-it note and you place it where you want to in terms of these 6 questions. If there are more questions that you would like to address, please say so now, or just write them on the board. You can copy and paste any one of these just by, you know, Control C and Control V. It's very easy. So I'll leave that also with you. Any comments and questions? Hello, anyone here?
Hi, I'm just busy typing.
Great.
Right? I think
That's right.
I think we mostly all are doing that, right?
Great. Right. And while you type and think, maybe I'll just say a couple of words if that's allowed. Why is this so important to me? Well, years ago, I was a community planner and architect working in very difficult places all around the north of England. And I began to get the idea, okay, we can do this project and this scheme and improve this land or rescue this, you know, old building or something, which is, you know, a good thing to do. It needs a lot of skill. but I began to see that there was much more structural things that needed to be addressed. So for myself, I came into the Foresight world almost by accident, just because it seemed like a necessary and urgent thing to do. And then I realized, okay, yeah, with the new word which came up, sustainability. This was, the global thing, but it needed new ways of working, new ways of exploring the future and linking that back to the present and so on. So again, well, at some point I met Ian Miles and then Austrian Saritas, and then I think Wendy, and became a member of the SAMI consulting group and so on. So went through a long period of trying to improve these methods, because it seemed, yeah, we had great methods, but often they were not used in everyday life out there, in the big city that I'm in right now. And even now, I have a reputation, but if I go to, the mayor or the director of economic development or something like this, and I say, yeah, let's run a Foresight exercise. And he or she will often say, well, that's nice, but actually we're really busy, thank you. So try again another time, and meanwhile, they make most terrible mistakes. At the moment, they have a plan, well, I say we have a plan for zero carbon Greater Manchester in just 17 years from now. They want to do transition big time. And I'm saying, sorry, I don't think this is working. I don't see it when I look out of the window. And they say, well, yeah, but we have a big program and a big publicity, and see our website, it looks great. And I say, well, how about some Foresight techniques? It could really help. And by the way, I've developed this theory of collective intelligence. And they say, oh no, that academic stuff, sorry, we haven't got time for that. And so now I'm simplifying, but this is often my lived experience. So if you have any comments and ideas for how this can work, great, let us know. So there's a lot of activity on tools for city and regional work. That's great. And urban planning seems not so popular just at the moment. That's fine. I'll just tidy up this thing a bit. It's fine to keep on talking, by the way. We can all multitask these days.
Can we?
So I'll put on some ideas I have on urban planning. And also, well, I will just mention one Foresight exercise we had, again, local, which was looking at low traffic neighborhoods in somewhere not far from here. And then, we had some result, and then the city council said, okay, yes, we'll have a policy and we have a little bit of money, not much, but enough to get started. So they put together, a proposal and then, a pilot experiment on low traffic neighborhood, meaning, you put barriers in the road to stop cars just running through, reclaim the space for humans, not so much cars, and so on and so on. And then it turned into a kind of culture war between the local people who wanted all this stuff and they were happy about the barriers, and other local people who are not happy about this stuff, and they say, no, the barriers are in the wrong place, it will be a problem, and if you make the streets safe for people, all the drunken people, the alcoholics, they will come and make trouble. So it was a really big culture war. So this was one experience of how not to do foresight in the local level in urban planning. Wendy, have you any advice about that? What did we do wrong?
Sorry, could you back up a second? I was looking for something.
Sorry.
What did we do in engaging in foresight at the local level? Sorry.
We started this, well, we did a small local project, which then led into a city council plan for low traffic neighbourhood. And this then became a culture war. Some of the residents wanted this, other residents wanted that. And it was very difficult to find any agreement. This is just a small local.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. And so a couple, because immediately where you say we have the residents and city council, so you were building bottom up, so yay, the residents feeling empowered. But of course, by doing that, you were challenging the sense of power in the city council by people who presumably ran for election for city council, so did so for the reason that they like having decision-making power. Mm-hmm. So you're dealing with power differentials and just within the region. One of the things, sorry, I'm going to back up a second. One of the things that people underestimate a lot is the amount of time that's needed to clarify and help people have an empathic understanding of the differences of perspective that everyone is bringing to the table, mm-hmm. and then to negotiate trade-offs. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people think like they'll be able to do a visioning process in, yes, there's a 3-day workshop process we're using for visioning, mm-hmm. without really getting the fact that if you're having conversations with multiple disparate kind of communities within the community or tribes within the community, however you want to put that, that there is actually a fairly long conversation that needs to be had, both about what they're all bringing to the table in terms of their assumptions and making those assumptions explicit, and also in choosing paths into the future or choosing even properties to guide emergent unfolding of the future, of aspirational futures. You have to negotiate the trade-offs, and that takes really a long time. And I think we don't, and I say this as someone who, as I said, collects tools like shiny things, that we often, and I think this is what Getchi was referring to when she was talking about the sort of the tyranny of the tool, right? We get so engaged in, well, this is a cool process we can take people through, that we forget to factor in, the process is operating at this speed. The thinking and the understanding and the empathy and the reconciliation and everything else is happening at very different speeds. And I'm wondering if that may have been, and especially when we're talking either as academics or as people who are bidding for projects, and you have a timeline, right? Yep. You have to get this project done by X date and write the report. Okay, my community is still struggling with their conversation. So,
yeah. So if you have, we've all done scenario work, I'm sure.
Your conversation for a second?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've been listening on and off. I was in one of the speakers of the session before.
I saw it.
Sharing some experiment about how art project and art spaces could be places to design urban futures. So I don't know if you followed the panel before, and I was actually interested in asking you the question: among all the cases that you have done on the future of cities, have you experimented their methods with art places or cultural institutions with audience that are, more in the cultural field? Have you done any project? I mean, because I think it's a quite underestimated potential, because creative people, it's their job to be creative. And when you embark them on a future journey, whatever the method you use, they take it personally, and it becomes part of their life. It's not that just, it's not an excursion. It's something that they can work with after in a cultural production, in a project. And so it's a way of incubating already some kind of micro futures by working with creatives. And that's what I'm trying to advocate for, generally speaking, such as in the session before. And I was quite curious to hear if it's something you have in mind in your, you know, when you, because it's one of the stakeholders that are not often are included. I know Gessi has done project in Africa, and I'm totally aware of the festival you worked on, and but otherwise it's quite rare.
Can I comment on it?
Yes, please go. Yeah.
Yes, so absolutely, we have in our context been experimenting with working with creatives, and then you might also be familiar with the whole space of Afrofuturism, which itself is very much driven by creatives. If anything, I think what I've been trying to do recently in my work is bring this idea of visualization, representation, the arts in general, into a conversation about the future in a way that also doesn't separate the two, because I think where we've gone, at least in the space of Afrofuturism, is where it's almost become a parallel form of futuring from then the other normal stuff, which doesn't change, in fact, and doesn't incorporate those approaches or even those people into what it does. So I think maybe that would be my one comment. I have recently been acquainted with a person, Vaia Karaiskau. I don't know, you might know her. She's from Open University of Cyprus. I'll put her name. I think she is part of the Global Futures Literacy Network at UNESCO, but she's based at Cyprus, and she's specifically been using the arts and deconstruction from the arts into thinking about the future. So again, these ideas about visualization and the role of the arts in the future in a much more academic way than we've been doing. I've been doing it maybe in the space of practice. She's doing some deep sort of theoretical work into this.
Yeah.
Or if you're interested in it, because the project I worked on for about 10 years about the future of the Greater Paris. I'm based in Paris. I can put the website is a bit old now, but at least it will give you, maybe that can be interesting for you to, because I made quite a few experiments with art school, design school, creatives of all kinds, like cis.net, and I've published quite a few articles also related to it for near future designing project, designing prototypes, designing futurescaping. When I did that, I was not aware of the concept of futurescape, but that's what I, retroactively, that's what we did. For short-term, long-term horizon, like one step was to work on a future vision at a horizon of 150 years, for instance. But some others were very much based on searching for weak signal for to empower the creative community. So very diverse steps. And I'm available if you want to talk further about it, or maybe Oscar will distribute the slides if that's interesting for you. Yeah. It's a project that is finished now for me, but I realize that it has been it's many steps of research that were not inscribed in the Foresight community, because it's with that project that I joined the Foresight community. And so it started more as an art project, and then an art-based research project, urban research project, and it became a Foresight research project. So it's more like coming from the outside.
So let's, your projects look fantastic. I would love to explore and know more. And as you can see, I think, in creative visual thinking and so on, I draw every day and so on. But I still find there's this big gap, between, here is the policy people and, planners, and sooner or later there'll be a road with concrete and steel, and there will be a, new urban development. And they say, oh, yes, you can do your creative stuff, and we will even give you an exhibition room. And it's all very nice, and everyone goes and has some wine or something, and then they go back to their day job. And it's very difficult, really, to build the connection between. Do you have any advice for that?
Well, I mean, I'm totally aware of what you're saying, and to be honest, with the project, so Paris Galaxy, it started as an art project, and then it entered the art research department of Sorbonne University, and then I had like all kind of a partnership with the design school, design management, art management masters, graphic design, a whole web of a collaboration. But I was invited a few times in the official platforms that were discussing the Greater Paris, but it remained very marginal. It's more, strangely, it's more abroad that I got much more interest at the Urban Lab at UCL, at Antwerp University, and it's actually a project that I'm invited to present in many contexts at Futurible International in Paris, at the Forsyth Institute, at the UNESCO ongoing Transforming Future seminar. So it's also because I started the project it was really in a corner. Like I started it as an artist, but my background was in economics and finance. So from the very beginning, I was interested in modelizing the future of the city by having a multidisciplinary approach. I gave it a very, I took a very clear focus on art, but in the model that I designed, I included economic dimension, educational dimension, urban planning. And so the conceptual matrix that I designed was also a pedagogic tool that I used in many contexts that were very good at showing why you need to think at different level and different perspectives, so that artists knew where they were, but also people who were in other disciplines knew where they were in that matrix. And so it has remained, I designed it quite intuitively with the first scenario I designed, like in 2008. So that's already a while ago, and but it ended up being a very useful pedagogical tool. I think Oscar is going to share my slide, or we can let me put my email in the chat. I can send you some material, and it's on the website is a bit old now, but.
Do you want to share your slide right now?
Maybe put it on the board also. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Put it on the board. Yes. Why not? Yes. If it's relevant. Yeah. I guess in 5 minutes or something, we should have just a plenary wrap-up discussion. And we'll have a quick look at the notes, the post-it notes which have gone up on the board and what they mean, and have a little chat. Yeah, that would be probably a good thing in about 5 minutes. Yep.
In about 5 minutes, so that we can finish at 6 o'clock.
We should finish on time. We can always have, virtual coffee anytime.
I'll check with the colleagues actually. So there are a lot of people now helping to run this system. So and there might be some translators also still working on this. So let's have an official ending of the session.
Sure.
And after that, I can see if the teams can stay open still, and then some conversation will continue with anybody who wishes to.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, Raphael, did you want to put something on the board?
Yeah, I'm trying to. Where should I put it? Because I would not. Because my slide. You know what? I think at the end of my presentation there is quite a few slides that do not relate. So I'd rather. I would need to go to clean a little bit my file before I import it.
Sure. Or just select one or two.
Yeah.
The board manager will come along after and tidy. Put everything in a tidy place. Futurescaper with the UK government, and that maybe started to bridge some of the gap between the stories that people think, most people think in stories and people and so and then other people think in technique and data and numbers and so on. And it seemed the Futurescaper online system maybe could bridge that gap. I think in practice it seemed quite problematic, for a number of practical reasons. But I wondered, that is on your list of useful tools. Can we use this?
We were using it very specifically to do scanning, and it was actually designed. I mean, and it works as a scanning database. It was actually designed to be a crowdsourcer. It actually works. It's in a sense, it's easier to use as a crowdsourcer, and it produces more interesting results in many ways because you're getting other people's, you're getting the actual community's idea about what changes they're seeing and what impacts they think they will have on their community. Whereas we were using it kind of as a way to create as a scanning database. So now, let's see.
Okay. So
you can put whole docs on the mural board, which is what I just did with my vision inventory, visioning processes compendium. And we'll see if it opens. Guess it opens and downloads. See, on Miro, you could just, oh wait, is that the doc file? Yes, hold on. On Miro, you could just like load a PDF and you could actually read it on Miro, which is interesting.
Yeah, I think you can load it, but you have to then download it on this one. I think Miro is slightly better than Mural. I just kind of got started with Mural and paid the money.
They get us caught in so many interesting ways.
Yeah, well, it's all new stuff. I mean, they're all learning, but I wish Mural had some of the added functionalities of Miro. So, also, you'll notice one or two red circles, and these are like critical comments, questions. You say, oh, the theory is nice, but actually the practice doesn't work. In my critical mind, I would say, well, sorry, we tried regional development with Foresight and it was okay, but then, the policy process did something different, and so on. Why is this? Can it be done better? So maybe at this moment, Ozcan, should we call the plenary back in, so if they're not already here, and aim to finish on time. If anyone wants to, continue to chat, that's fine with me. I'm around for another half an hour.
Yes, that sounds like a good idea.
Okay.
Well, everybody's here, I guess.
Yeah. So probably the best way to do this is not to look for long speeches of summing up and so on now, but maybe just to review, if I may, the comments which have come up or questions. And I asked a question about tools, and here I see, 3 horizons, shared history. This looks very good, and that's a useful thing. And then the generations chain, excellent. Futurescaper, and here it is, the Futurescaper we were just talking about, which is a way of, how would you say, telling stories in a structured way, which then can be analysed and sorted in terms of data management. Next, Hamburg. Well, we've tried this also, and so on. So interesting list. There's a big W. And Futures Literacy Labs. And I'll just mention, okay, so I have this project just about a couple of kilometers from here, in an inner city neighborhood, rough, tough place. It's full of drug dealers and illegal people and social problems of all kinds. And we tried a futures project 5 years ago. And what did we find? Oh, the usual people come to our meetings, but not the drug dealers and not the people with really big problems. So, yeah, next time we want to open the door and say, oh, drug dealers, welcome. Come in, we will not, take your photograph and so on and so on. So, well, we have a lot to learn. There's some good comments on urban planning. Does anyone want to tell us what their idea was, more than is already on the board at this moment? Please feel free to speak. If you don't, then we will never know.
Could I make a comment on the fact that I've been championing crowdsourcers, and they are useful, but can I now talk a little bit about downsides?
Yeah.
Just like with survey research, you have to work really hard to encourage participation from the crowd in using crowdsourcers. Or you have to have a dedicated community that already knows that that are already excited about sharing their ideas using the crowdsourcer. But it's difficult to make something go viral, and I can cite examples of how that didn't work with, say, the EU's Futurium project, which wanted to crowdsource something. And so you have the same issues with crowdsourcing that you do with survey research, which is really getting a good sample size. You have interesting other problems with gaming, like the interactive games, like the online games like Urgent Evoke or Superstruct or some of the IFTF Foresight engine games, is that they assume that people have a lot of time to be online playing the game. So one of the things that we do need to maybe think about doing, if we create a list of here are some methods or tools or resources or approaches, is sort of say, this is what you have to make it work. And this is, and here's what you can get out of it if it works well. And here are some downsides, be aware of them. Because almost everything that we can talk about in terms of encouraging participation is going to have some barrier, because if it were easy, we would be doing it all the time. I mean, and we should get to the point where we are doing it all the time. But I think it's a participation, encouraging participation is in itself a skill that needs to be acquired. And I think that connects back to was it Ian who was saying we need to work on our communications in Futures and Foresight, because we don't always get the message or the idea across.
Yeah. Any comments on that? And just to say, this is all emerging, because now we have WhatsApp groups, but they're very secure. We have Facebook groups, which are very not secure. So a lot of people are researching with Facebook groups and Twitter feeds and so on. And
can I just intervene here for a second, Joe? So this is now 17:59. So it was just 1 minute before the official ending of the session. Sure. I just would like to actually thank to everyone who participated today, who gave excellent speeches, and who also helped us actually to run these sessions. There's the big team behind it from the Institute, and also we have translators who have been working hard since this morning. So now it's a good time probably to let them to finish the day, because they will continue working tomorrow and the day after with the same speed. So many thanks to them. So, at this point, so there's a YouTube live connection was also going, so live broadcasting, so that will also be stopped, and the translation will also be stopped, so interpretation. So thanks to them, but we have the liberty to continue as much as we want, as long as we want. So the teams will be available and open. I think your whiteboard is available and open. So yeah, we can keep going. Yeah,
okay.
Thanks for that.
Thanks, Ozcan. So, well, basically, thank you, translators. I didn't realize they were working all this time, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, in Russian, great.